Hello world, it's Dave again, and this is going to be part 2 of the Reformation. Monsters in Munster. Now I've got to have a little preamble here before I get into this. Now I know that I said at the beginning of this that it would probably be best if I were to do this in 2 parts, because there's just so much information. You can see from the first one that it was quite long. It was about 36 minutes. If you made it to the end of that, thank you so much. Thank you for arriving here. What I've realized as I continued with this story was that 2 isn't enough. I'm going to have to go with 3 parts. But this is good for you and me. It means that you can get it in more digestible chunks, and I can then just spread this out so it has a little bit more of a natural flow to it. I want to say as well with that if you were just jumping in now at part 2, if you don't care about getting some of the context of the story and all that, that's fine. That's cool. Thank you for joining me now. But if you want your story in proper consecutive chunks, start with part 1. And then you'll get all the background of the Reformation that now leads up to the point I'm going to talk about now, which is a story of Anabaptism in Munster. So, with that said, let us begin. I had left off in the previous part 1 talking about Melchior Rothman, who was an Anabaptist, one of these the part of the radical Reformation, who had thought that the end of the world was coming and it was going to be in Strasbourg. He arrived there, and then immediately all his followers were rounded up and killed, and he was locked in a tower. Not surprisingly, because in 1529, I believe it was. 1529? Yes, 1529. Holy Roman Emperor, when said that you can exterminate the Anabaptists. You couldn't by that point get rid of the Lutherans because, well, the Lutherans had risen to a level of popularity that if you tried to exterminate them, it'd be like exterminating half the population. But the Anabaptists were so extreme that you could wipe out that group. So they came under the radar again of the Catholic Church as a group that could just out and outright be killed. Melchior Rothman gets his idea going, but he gets locked away, as I say. But what this kind of seeds is the idea that millennialism is going to happen, that there's going to be the apocalypse, it's coming, the end of the world, Palooza, and this idea is picked up after he is locked away, and people are thinking that he was right so far as the end of the world is coming, but not right in where it's going to take place and what time it's going to take place. They believe that it's going to occur in Munster, this new group, Munster. And to talk about Munster now, I want to give you a little bit of background on the town before we get rolling, and then that will lead us into a description of the main players in the town that will allow all this to progress. So Munster, I'm going to do that a couple times, I'm sure. Munster is unique because if you go around Germany at this time, what makes things kind of manageable, for as much as there's all these growing pains, is that there's usually a town that is Catholic or a town that is Protestant. And because you have a majority of either type of population in whichever town, you don't get people rubbing backs with each other in a way that's going to light a fire. In Munster, that is not the case. It is one of these rare towns where you actually have almost a 50-50 split. And so it's like a tinderbox. It's ready to go off. That then leads us to the next point that I spoke in part 1 about the peasant uprising. The peasant uprising, a result of peasants now being able to read the Bible in vernacular and realizing that this character who shows up in the Bible named Jesus says that all men are equal. And they start to ask questions of their position in life being preordained, that they should always be a peasant just because they were a peasant, and they have uprisings demanding all kinds of things like a redistribution of wealth. They want to all be able to vote. They want price freezing. They want all these things that are just way too intense for the time, seen as extreme, and they are quelled. One of the things, this is one of the towns that suffered from that. The peasant uprising occurred here. Peasants came from this town. So what the ruling body did afterwards to kind of throw them a bone was they instituted a town council to say we're at least which was made up of elected officials from the town. And they're saying in this way that we're paying attention to some of the things that you have to say. We're not just ignoring you. It's not just a monarchy above you. Look, elected officials. And in this town, so you got the elected officials now that I've described. That's very unique, as well as the fact that you have the 50-50 rubbing up against each other. You have above the town council, of course, you have the prince bishop, who is that ruling body. He's the guy who kind of looks after what the council is up to. But then you end up with, because of the 50-50 on the town council, a great variety of individuals. So a couple of individuals that you have on there are Bernard Rothman. Bernard Rothman is he is one of the new elite. Because things are shaken up economically and peasants are now able to get a little more social mobility because there's more access to starting your own business. He is one of these guys, and he's a cloth merchant who's spread everywhere. He's doing really, really well, made tons of money, but coming from this poor background initially, he has aligned himself, as discussed in the first part, more so with the Lutheran movement because he has an issue with the established order. He doesn't come from it. And then with him, you have this fellow named Bernard, it's the two Bernards, Bernard Knipperdolem. Now, Bernard Knipperdolem is also on the council, and Bernard Knipperdolem, love that name, he has a printing press, and where he is he's kind of a Lutheran, he is under the umbrella of Lutheranism, and that's the way that Anabaptists right now are trying to protect themselves, because it's hard to, unless you say really specific, really communistic things, to identify yourself as an Anabaptist. But he has a printing press, and he can say whatever he wants on this. But before I talk about that, I want to talk about some of the things that are being argued about in the town. First, however, when I talk about that, I'm going to introduce one other character. His name is Jan van Leyden. So you've got Bernard Rothman, Jan van Leyden, and Bernard Knipperdolem. Bernard Knipperdolem and Jan van Leyden are just characters who are stirring the pot. They're the shit disturbers. That's the best way to put it. Who are in Munster right now, and they're taking issue with the things that Catholics are doing, and I want to now give you a couple examples of those things. So one of them is idolatry. They really don't like that. Lutheranism doesn't like the idea that you would worship a false idol. It says you shouldn't do that in the Bible, but in Catholicism, there's a lot of worship of saints, the Mother Mary. If you've got some old artifact that's seen as having religious significance, that will be put on an altar in a Catholic church. And they're going into churches with the Rough Riders, whatever you want to call them, and they're smashing stuff and they're breaking bones. And the Catholics are really upset about that. Second to this, you have something, I like to highlight this because, again, by our standard nowadays, it would be so trivial, is the idea of Mass. So when you have Mass in the Catholic Church, that's when you have a cracker, you got a wafer, you eat the wafer, you got a little bit of wine, and they say that this is the body of Christ and this is the blood of Christ. And the Lutherans say that's not actually the blood of Christ, and that's not actually his flesh. Catholics say it is. And they argue over this, and it's a major issue. It's you can't have Christ crackers. No, it's not real. And they go back and forth, and the town council, under the leadership of Bernard Rothman and Bernard Knipperdolem and van Leyden, will try and get this stopped. They will say you can't be having this Mass because it's not actually, it's heresy, it's wrong that you're actually eating the flesh of Christ and you're drinking his blood. You're not actually doing that. But then the Catholics, there's of course a huge backlash, and the Catholics are going to the Prince Bishop and saying, we're living in sin, man. We can't eat Christ crackers, for God's sake, literally. And you need to change that. So he then leans on the town council with some of these Lutheran guys and says they have to be allowed to have their Mass. Stop that. And they do. So that you can see the back and forth. But for a sort of, the sources describe a civic pride that where people just seem to, regardless of this religious division, they're just getting along. They're putting it, beside them. They're not letting it dominate everything, and nothing is really sparked into violence, nothing more than this kind of harassment of each other that's been occurring so far. Where this changes then is, like I was saying, you have Bernard Knipperdollen with a printing press, and where outwardly on the council he's been very careful to appear quite Lutheran, and so not able to be exterminated, he starts printing things that are having an increasingly Anabaptist edge to them. Things that are saying, if you come to Munster, the feeling is that everyone wants to share their wealth, and I invite you to come to Munster, because this is where the actual end of the world is going to occur, and we are going to rise to heaven, and we're going to do so sharing our wealth with price freezing, where every man is equal, just as you have been reading in the Bible. So you can imagine for poor peasants everywhere that these are getting out to, and in a vernacular that they can understand and read these pamphlets, that this is really, really appealing to them. So a change in the population is starting to occur. This information gets out, people start reading it, they've been invited by Bernard Knipperdollen, and they start coming to the city, and they're told just to bring their own pious nature and weapons to prepare for this moral evolution that is occurring here in Munster. Now, the citizens of Munster aren't blind. They see what's happening, and a lot of the Catholics who see this start to freak out. Maybe even some of the more moderately minded Lutherans as well, because they, just as I've described in the previous video, Lutherans are not necessarily Anabaptists. They don't believe in this communistic lifestyle where you share wealth and you do price freezing and this kind of stuff, and no one should have money. But the Catholics start to leave. Some of them start to leave, and in lesser amounts, maybe a few of the Lutherans who are freaked out. And the other factor is that all the poor people start to arrive. And if you're poor, you're a little more extreme. You came here because you thought there'd be a little piece of the pie that's getting offered up for you. So what does this mean for a place that is run in a large way, in a large part, by a town council? It means that at the next town council, Catholicism is on its way out, and this new extremism, the radical Reformation guys, are starting to get more power, and it's starting to come out into the open now that these characters on the council aren't so much just moderate Lutherans, they're actually Anabaptists. And so in 1534, they have a new election, and it is majority Lutheran in brackets, new Anabaptist leaning members who are then elected to this council. And so enters at this point the great monster of Munster, or I would say probably the most significant. And his name is Jan Matthias. Jan Matthias. I want to give you a little bit of a physical characterization of this guy, because it's good and it kind of shows you how he's not just going by the power of his spoken word. This guy exudes kind of the character that he's going for. So he's tall, gaunt, big black beard. He goes around with a rope belt on, black robe, dressed all in black. And I want to interject here with a little thing. If you've ever read Terry Pratchett, he writes the Discworld series. They have witches in the Discworld series, and what they talk about, that is, if you, half of being a witch, almost the majority of being a witch, is not actually casting magic. It's that people would perceive you as a witch. That's where all your power comes from. And so here, I believe that Jan Matthias has really tapped into this, because if you're going to be as extreme as you are, then you better look the part, and a lot of your power will be based on that perception by your audience. And he is filling the part. This guy looks like an old school prophet. He's dressed like one. He's got the beard like one. He is also married to a wife 20 years younger than himself. Wish I had her name. I could have gotten her name. Oh well. And she dresses all in white. And so it's this really intense contrast of herself and him. She dresses all in white, him all in black, austere. And he is elected, along with these other guys, re-elected to the town council. And he starts to take over. Now, why is this scary? Well, I will tell you why. In a time where if you brought any one of these citizens forward now to our time, put them in our time, you would consider them an absolute religious extremist. And you kind of couldn't blame them for it. They're living in a time where there's a lot less known. It was just the way things were done. Well, Jan Matthias in that time is considered very, very, very extreme and radical, to give you some perspective. And he has an especially unique characteristic described by the source that I'm looking at as a walkie-talkie to God. And this isn't even meant in a halfway reasonable sense. It's not as though he dreams at night. It's not as though he prays and he hears. This means that he can be interrupted in mid-conversation and speak to God. He is a red line phone to God at any time. And as we're speaking now, he might pause. Oh, what's that? Kill them all? Kill them all. And he would do that. And that's just the kind of character that he is. He comes in, guns blazing, is elected immediately because you can see the extremist slant, all the poor coming into the town. They want this guy as their man. They want this prophet. He's got a direct line to God. How could you not want that person to be in power in your city where the end times are coming? Have to bear that in mind, that for anyone who's out on the periphery, this looks insane, but for anybody who's getting closer and closer to these ideas, this is the obvious choice. You would go with the guy who can speak to God, wouldn't you? Not the guy who wouldn't. So he gets in and he wants to shake things up immediately once he's elected to the council. Of course you would. If you can speak to God, he's telling you exactly what to do. And just like any good extremist leader, he says, what we've got to do if we want to fix things here is kill everybody who isn't yet an Anabaptist. That's really the problem. And isn't that great? Wouldn't that solve all our problems? If we could just kill people who didn't agree with us, things would be so simple. But for all the people who are in the town right now, they've been pretty intense so far. They've been calling in Anabaptists. They do want this. You know, Bernard Rothman, Bernard Nipperdalem, Jan van Leyden. These guys kind of wanted this, but maybe not that. And so they appeal to him and say, you know, maybe we don't kill them. You realize, even from a political standpoint, that that's going to turn everyone against us. That won't work at all. And so in grand fashion, he turns to God, has a chat, comes back and says, you know what, you're right. God agrees with you. That would turn everybody against us. That's a good idea that he had. Anyways, so he says, but what we can do is to amend this. Maybe we don't kill everybody. We can at least, we can do a mass expulsion of everyone that is not aligned with us. And that's going to be the Catholics and Lutherans, but the Lutherans can convert. We can give them a chance to be baptized, have that choice, do it all over again, the second baptism, and join our cause. You know, they're not completely lost yet. They should be given an opportunity. Get in on this party. And they agree with that, or he agrees with them, or sorry, they agree with him suggesting an expulsion. If he can't kill everybody, at least let me expel people from their homes. So they agree with that, and it starts to happen. So on February, I have here in February 1534, they start to expel people from their homes, and it's really brutal. You get stories of, you know, like women who had just given birth the other day, they're getting kicked out on their ass. Everybody's getting kicked out. It's snowing. It's a real nasty time to be booted out of your home. And something to consider as well is the wealth that people have at this time. They're told to just get out, leave. You're leaving your wealth behind. Wasn't a lot of banks back then, and so whatever wealth you had accumulated, if you have a home, your clothes on your back, that is your wealth. And so when you're told to leave it all behind, you're leaving everything behind. And so most people leave. They don't really have a choice. Lutherans are, of course, given the choice. Some of them decide to go for that option where they're allowed to be baptized again, and they become an Anabaptist just because they figure maybe this will all kind of blow over and I want to keep my stuff. They don't really know just how intensely communistic this might get. So they're just assuming that this equates to them keeping their stuff. I'll get baptized again. What the hell? And so they do it. They get baptized. But then you have some people who stay in the town. Some Catholics just won't leave. They just don't have the intelligence to realize things are getting crazy. And Matthias, of course, wants these people booted out, and he says that this should be justification for him to be able to kill them. And his argument is that if you leave these Catholics here, if you leave these people who haven't been willing to get expelled, they're going to spread their religious disease like a virus. And it's a strange irony that now the reason that Jan Matthias is giving to wipe out Catholics is the reason that Catholics gave for wiping out Anabaptists. The major point of my previous part 1 was to say that when you have a freedom of information, it goes through growing pains, and there is no right or wrong side. It's just growing pains. You're going to get people doing stupid things on either side of the argument. You can see how this is extremely the case here. So we continue along. At this point, when everybody has been kicked out, the Prince Bishop realizes that something's got to be done, and he decides the following day, when he sees all these people getting kicked out of the city, he's got to intervene. He's got to put the city under siege, and the city goes under lockdown. And he starts to go about the business of hiring troops, paying for cannons to arrive to the city. He's anticipating things are going to go pretty bad from this point forward, and he's right, they are. Now, I was talking about these pamphlets that had gone out before. Pamphlets are still going out that have said, you need to come to Munster, things are changing, it's becoming an Anabaptist haven, the end of the world is coming, this is the spot, you want to be here when the 4 horsemen arrive. And this is reaching thousands and thousands of poor people where it was popular before, and this whole change in the city occurred. It's now getting to more and more people, and thousands of people start to head down or up or around, wherever they're approaching from, to the city. But now the authorities have been made aware of what it is that is happening. And so where before it was kind of hard, where are the Anabaptists? Where are the people to exterminate? Well, they're all heading towards Munster. And so all these people who start to head towards Munster are intercepted by the Prince Bishop, and he starts wiping them out, killing them by the thousands. He's just, it's like you found a way to get all those cockroaches with the lights on. They've come out of the woodwork, and so he starts to wipe them out. A few are turned back, but that's very, very rare. And all these reinforcements that were maybe going to turn the tide of this siege eventually are not going to show up to Munster. That is the major point that's being made here. Before, it was just enough to change the leadership. The people within that new leadership wanted more to come so they could break the siege. That's not going to happen now because they're all getting cut off before they even get there. So let's return to the town. What's happening in the town where all these people are getting wiped out? Outside the town, and we're coming to reinforce it. Well, things are getting really, really intense as Jan Matthias is longer and longer in control. And he's starting to do some old-fashioned things like book burnings. He's getting a good fire going. Every book is to be burned, except for the Bible. Why would you need anything else? And I should make a point now about the rarity of books and what a loss this would have been at any time in history, where now with electronic publication, and everybody just knows the modern freedom of information as compared to when you wrote books back then in the 1500s, a book was priceless. You want to talk, the perfect example for a Visa commercial at this time would have been a book, priceless. And so they're just burning books. They're starting to now implement those much more severe communist leanings as far as money goes. They're actively searching out any sort of debt that people have in the town, and they're wiping it out, destroying any sort of IOUs. They're banning money. They're starting to redistribute property. And where some of the Lutherans, maybe the more moderate Lutherans, were thinking, oh, this will blow over, it's starting to look really, really, really terrifying to them because things are getting out of control. It's getting really intense. So people are going to get frustrated because they're realizing now, oh wow, this is way more intense than I thought it was. This Matthias guy he's freaking me out. And so people start to talk, like people will. And one night, a guard on duty, he starts to talk some shit. That is the technical term. And he starts to say, maybe this Jan Matthias guy, I don't know if he's actually got all his, he's a few sandwiches short of a picnic, you might like to say. He's not all together up there. And everybody around him just clams up because, they don't know how he's going to react. This is a guy who burns all the books, remember, and has been banning money and stuff. Maybe not so smart to say something. But this person's still under the illusion of some freedom in his town, is thinking, well, we elected him, we should be able to say whether he's horrible or not. Well, this is the first major challenge to Jan Matthias's control within the town, where somebody's actually spoken out against him. And he uses it to make an example. He is in control. Now, this guy who spoke out, his name is Hubert Reuscher. He's the blacksmith of the town. He is bound and brought to a field. This is a big town. Maybe I should have given the dimensions of that. He is brought out to a field where the crowd gathers around. They want to know, what is Jan Matthias going to say about this guy? And he says that there is an evil spirit within this man, and that an example must be set of him for the actions that he's taken against the Leyden council. At this point, several people in the crowd speak out and say, what do you mean an example of him? We can't just kill him. In our town, we have an established order for if somebody does something wrong, we have a trial for them, and no man can be judge, jury, and executioner. And over his shoulder he goes, Jan Matthias, to have a little chat with God, and he comes back and says, what are you talking about? And the source describes him just being, unhinged at this point, that he would have his authority questioned like this. And he has these people instantly arrested, which is now leaving the crowd wondering, well, if that, oh man, there goes reason, everything, that was the last kind of, I thought things were sort of sane here. They're not. There is no protection left. Now at this point, it's not clear who does this, whether it's Jan Matthias or it's Jan van Leyden, but one of the two goes and grabs a halberd, which is basically a spear with a big axe on it, and runs up and impales the blacksmith with the spear, saying this is what he had to get. He had to have an example be made of him. This is where this was going in the first place. Sadly, he's a big, strong guy. Whoever did strike him didn't do so effectively. He's still lying there screaming. I'm sorry to make light of this, but some of it is just so insane, this whole thing, that I try and do that just so it's not so dark for people to make it through. I try and keep it light. So he's not dead yet. He's just screaming there. If you think of the Black Knight in Monty Python, it's just a flesh wound. He's trying to survive with a halberd in his back. They couldn't kill him. And so Jan Matthias grabs a gun out of somebody's pocket at the time, points it, and shoots him in the head to put him out of his misery, because this guy's suffering so ridiculously. He doesn't die. He's then just lying screaming on the ground with a bullet in his head and a halberd in his back, and the townspeople are being absolutely traumatized with the violence that is occurring, and realizing what a breakdown of their society is happening right now. He is taken away by some of the townspeople and dies 8 days later in somebody's house. Now, I want to interject. I love that word, interject. I want to talk about now how there is this dichotomy in the town that I mentioned sort of before, which is that people at the same time viewing all this violence and kind of the breakdown of any real order that they might have had in the city, well, a lot of people are growing more afraid. Whoever is more extreme is enjoying this more and more and more, because they're seeing their leader take control. So where there's all this violence, people have been told to celebrate after instances like this. So you have this huge joy in the city as well. It's a real emotional madhouse in here. All the violence and breakdown, while at the same time anybody who is kind of extremist or radical is thinking that this is finally the real deal. This is, this is the apocalypse. This is the end of the world is coming, and this is how it was going to come. Realizing after this, Jan Matthias thinks that if this guy was the first to speak out against me, he's probably not the last. So quite intelligently, he realizes that, well, he better do something about it. And he says that there's too many naysayers in the town, and that if he's going to address this issue, he's got to have them wiped out. And he gets men, women, and children who had not become Anabaptists past a certain point brought to the cathedral in the town and locked in there and told that basically it's in God's hands and that he can't help it, but because they've been so unfaithful, that he's likely going to have to kill them all. And they're in there, and he leaves them in there to stew for several hours. And you can imagine the terror in these people at this time, having viewed, just in a recent week, 8 days before, a guy being killed for having said something just poorly about him. Anybody who was suspect has been rounded up, including children, as I say, and put into this cathedral. So they're terrified, they're stewing, and eventually he re-enters, and he shows up with armed men, and he says he's going to have a little talk with them. And the source describes them at this point as crawling towards him and begging them, saying, we've just been so sinful, we didn't realize the error of our ways. Please intercede on our behalf with God. We know you can, and maybe he'll forgive us for what he's done. We know now how we feel. We would never, go against what it is that you have to say, since you have this connection with God. And in true Matthias form, he just drops down on his knees, starts to pray, gets up through a short period of time and goes, "You're clear. It turns out it's okay. God has forgiven you. You may return to the fold." Now, you want to talk about an effective form of crowd control. Abject terror works better than anything else. And Jan Matthias seems to have been able to tap into that. This point, you have, now that he's getting more and more control, he gets a full-on communism going. He puts it into play where everyone is turning over their goods to the town council. And it's now under absolute control of Jan Matthias. April 5th, 1534, insider info arrives to, well, someone sneaks a message into Munster, basically, to the Leyden council at this time, that is now solidly in power. They have all the town's wealth that they redistribute however they want. No one is going to say a word because, they fear for their lives, that they're going to get wiped out. And they receive info, which has been discussed thus far already, that all those reinforcing troops are not going to make it. They're not coming. This is big news for the ruling class. So how do they deal with it? What happens? Well, the following story, you could say a lot of things about Jan Matthias. You could say, like I have, that he's a whack job. You could say that he's absolutely nuts. He's a violent, horrible man. But one thing you could not say with the story that is now going to follow is that he was faking it. This is a guy who truly believed the madness that he was spouting. So he's at a party. Jan's at a party. He's kind of like a celebrity in the town, because the guy who can talk to God directly, how could he not be? So whenever he's out at a wedding or a party, people are kind of interested in what it is that he's doing. I would be too. I'm guilty of that. If I were in that day and age, I probably would as well. So he's at an outdoor wedding, and then all of a sudden, as far as we can tell in the modern sense, he starts to have an epileptic seizure and drops head onto the table that he's at. And then people are like, "What? What's going on with that guy?" And then he pops up. And he starts to talk, shaking people's hands, saying things like, "Thy will be done," shaking people's hands, going around. He stands up, and he leaves, he staggers away. all messed up. Now, the people at this time in the town council that saw this happen, they've got to look strange enough. They start to say, people like Bernard Rothman and Nipperdalm say, oh, he's just received more messages from God. That's all this likely is. So we'll wait to see what he has to say, whatever that outburst was. And what it is, he then tells people later when he comes out of this, is that what he was told at that time was that the reinforcements aren't coming. So this is his way of communicating it. I see as making a big show of it, although like I say, he must have believed it. This is just how his mind dealt with the fact that no help was coming. And so he says that as a result of the troops not coming, that he will in fact have to smite the bishop's army himself by the power of God. So Jan, the following day, is going to go out with about 10 or 12 guys as an honor guard and wipe out the prince bishop. Love to be one of those guys chosen, eh? So his force, he's got 10 or 12 guys. He's got himself. You got about, what do you got? You got like 13 people max there. So the prince bishop, his army is composed of, it's big figures because it's hard to be accurate when they're looking back at this time. It's between 3,000 and 8,000. So it's looking like a pitched battle unless God might intercede. So the old man the following day mounts up. He mounts up. He gets ready to head out in full armor. He's got his honor guard with him. He goes out, and the prince bishop doesn't exactly know what's going on at first. You have to realize between the line of the siege and the town itself is a dead zone, basically. And so at first he kind of thinks maybe this is a delegation coming out to Pari, or whatever the word is for, they're going to talk terms. And he realizes it's not. These guys are charging. Okay. And so he sends 500 heavy cavalry, or cavalry, I should be careful, that might be two different things. He sends 500 cavalry to intercept him. So whether that's heavy or light cavalry, cavalry light, that's pretty intimidating. That's going to effectively kill a guy who doesn't have God on his side, or God, didn't show up that day. His alarm didn't go off. He wakes up, I've done this, he's like, oh no, sorry, Jan, I was going to be there. So Jan gets cut to pieces, absolutely decimated and destroyed. He's pierced in his side with a spear. He has all his guts ripped out. He is then chopped into little itty bitty pieces. His head's put on a stake out in front of the town. And his genitals, one night, then very soon following, are then nailed to one of the doors on the town. So he wasn't faking his belief. He really believed he was going to get some backup, but apparently God slept in. So that is where I would like to leave part 2 of this story, because immediately you must be thinking, well, the madness has at least ended. Jan Matthias, this hardcore, extremist, is dead. All the people are going to work out something with the bishop, and everything will be okay. Let the madness stop. Well, I assure you it doesn't. It goes on, and it goes on and on. Or at least I should say, it will take one more part to conclude this. So, if you enjoyed this, please do like and subscribe. I'm going to be doing many, many different periods of history and stories like this. So please do like and subscribe if you enjoy it. If you've made it this far in the series, I really appreciate that. I'm seeing now it's like a 40-minute video. These are long, they're a lot to get through, but maybe you can enjoy them doing whatever. And stay tuned, because part 3 is to come, the final thrilling conclusion of Monsters in Munster, the Reformation part 3. So thank you very much, and like I like to say, Thanks for tripping with Dave, and until we meet again next time, world, ciao for now.